Welcome to today's session, everyone.
We are PreMedCC, a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021.
Our goal as an organization was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities, with the hope of guiding the next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians.
And while we advertise our organization as being for community college students, our events are open to anyone.
We realize that finding guidance and mentorship in a pre-med journey can be especially challenging for first-generation pre-med students,
people that lack the financial resources, or just those who do not know people in the medical field.
One of the best parts about our events is that they are virtual, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home.
We typically have events on Fridays from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12:30 Pacific Standard Time.
If you aren't able to attend the event, all of our sessions are uploaded on our YouTube channel.
Many of our sessions will end up with a Q&A with the speakers.
Any questions that you have, you may put it in the Q&A session on Zoom, and our team members will read them and have them answer.
After you have attended our event, you can log into our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today.
If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate to show that you attended our session today.
If you want to stay connected with our upcoming events or just want to tell your pre-med friends about the PreMedCC, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as @PreMedCC.
Well, welcome everyone. We're glad that you could join us today. We have the honor of having Madeleine speak about secondaries. Madeleine is a graduate of Santa Barbara City College and transferred to UCLA and was majored in the molecular biology, I would say. Molecular
developmental
biology. And then graduated with summa cum laude, which means like that's a really high grades. And then took the MCAT and scored in the 97th or 98th percentile, and is now starting medical school in a few weeks at University of Rochester in New York. And she's going to talk about secondaries. I know that a lot of you are going to have questions. Just put them in the Q&A section, and we will get them all answered. The only thing that we ask that not to repeat the questions, but we promise that all of your questions will be answered and that we see them all. So thank you, and without further ado.
Well, thank you everyone for coming today. I know it's nice to have everyone here on a Friday. So I did create slides that I'm going to go through just to kind of talk a little bit about secondaries. But then also, if you guys have questions as I'm going through the slides, or if you have questions about specific prompts, feel free to put those in the Q&A and I'll try to address them as we go. So I'm going to start screen sharing. Okay. You guys able to see all this? One sec, sorry. I'm technical difficulties. I'm just going to log into the right email address real quick. Okay, there we go. That should be working. Can everyone see this?
Yep.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, guys. So yeah, this is just going to be a pretty informal session today, just how to prepare for secondaries. So what are secondaries? They're secondary applications, and these are going to be your school-specific prompts. So that's at the very beginning of the application cycle, you send in your primary application to AMCAS, and that's, I think, just opened up a few days ago. So maybe some of you have sent in your primary application. Ideally, you'd like to get that in somewhere in June. I've heard is like that's the ideal timeline because that'll give you enough time to be working on your secondary applications. So secondary applications are an additional cost. They can range anywhere. I think the cheapest one I had was $30, and then they can even go up to $150. So I'm going to say average is about $100 per secondary application, and that's only if you're not on the fee waiver system. So if you were qualified for the AMC fee waiver, then you're able to kind of negotiate to get secondaries at a reduced cost. You do have to email the school to ask them about that, but for the most part, if you do qualify for free assistance, then they're pretty willing to work with you. So secondaries are sent out once your AMCAS application is verified. So say you submitted your application today, most likely at peak processing time for the AMCAS application, like you probably won't be verified until mid-July. Personally, I sent in my primary application last year on June 6th, and then I wasn't verified until July 15th. So that gave me about a month and a half of just sitting and waiting for my application to be verified. And that's an ideal time to start doing your secondaries and pre-writing them, because I realized pretty quickly that once the secondaries start coming in, they all come in at once. So to have pre-written essays is really helpful, and that's going to be what we're talking about today. One thing I did put down here is that some schools do screen your primary application with a base MCAT and GPA that they're looking for. This really ranges from school to school, so don't freak out if you're maybe have one number that's less than ideal. For the most part, schools are looking for students with above a 3.0 and above a 500 MCAT. Even if your numbers are a little bit below that, though, it's not every school. A lot of schools do what they call a soft screen. So somebody will look over your application, and if you have other extracurriculars or other activities that you've been involved with, even if your metrics aren't at that point, you'll still get through the secondary process. So if you have a specific school that you're looking at, I would recommend checking out the MSAR to find out more specific information. Okay, so before you start writing your secondaries, I think it's really important to kind of take a break and reflect on what exactly you want to convey in your essays. So what I did was my first just pre-writing session, I just kind of sat down and thought, what are the qualities that I really want medical schools to see? What are the personal attributes I have that I want to convey in these essays? So we've seen this model on the side here, the AMCAS experiences, attributes, and metrics model. So basically here in this inner ring is your metrics. That's going to be what's on your primary application. You know, they're looking at MCAT scores, GPA, your grades, etc. But then also they're looking at your experiences. So on the AMCAS for your primary application, you have those 15 experiences. So that's life experiences, leadership roles, clinical experiences, working in community service. So your primary application is showing this, and it's showing this, but then as you can see, there's so much more that they're looking at. They want to know, you know, personal identity, where you live, things that you're interested in, your, you know, family status, everything, all of these other, you know, attributes of us. So secondaries are nice because they are an opportunity for you to show that, that you might not have been able to show in your primary application. So I think another really important thing to look at is, was there anything important that you didn't include in your primary application? Personally, I minored. My minor was society and genetics, and I did some medical humanities work in that minor, but I realized after I submitted my primary application that I didn't really go as in depth on that as I wanted to, and I felt like it was something really important for me to bring up and for schools to know about me. So I would recommend, I probably should have looked over my primary application a little bit more closely before submitting it. But if there's things like that where you just didn't have a chance to mention it, maybe it didn't fall into any of the experiences options, or it felt like it was outside of that, now's your chance to show that to medical schools. Another thing that I would really recommend is to choose your school list wisely. I submitted my primary application to about, I think, 43 schools, which was a little bit too much, especially because then I had 43 secondaries all coming in at once. So I think when I was submitting my secondaries, I really looked at the schools a little more closely, and there were a few that I had applied to that I just wasn't really a good fit for. I didn't have the same mission fit, which schools are looking for. So my personal application was a little bit more service oriented. I did a lot of community service and medical humanities, and I applied to some really, really research heavy schools, which I didn't have any medical research. So I think it's important for you to kind of sit down and look at the type of applicant that you are and what you want the type of schools that you want to go to, and if you can have a mission fit with those schools. So you can find the mission fit, or the mission statements on the MSAR. And then, so I'm going to go over some of the typical prompts that you'll see for secondaries. Prompts typically range from 250 to 1,000 words. Some of them are outliers. I think one of the more famous secondary outlier is for USC Keck. They have some 60-word short answer questions that are completely different than any of the other secondaries you'll see. One of them was last year was just name 3 things that you care absolutely nothing about in 60 words, which was a lot harder than it seems. But some of the more common prompts that most schools ask are the diversity essay, the adversity essay, a leadership essay, the why us prompt. COVID, I'm not sure if that's going to be this application cycle, but I know last year it was a very common question, was asking about the pandemic, and then just any upcoming plans that you have. So I'm going to break down all of these in the next couple of slides. So the diversity essay. With these prompts, some of my actual secondaries from last year, I did take out the school names, but for the most part, these are pretty typical for what you'll see. So X School of Medicine values diversity in all its forms. How will your background and experiences contribute to this important focus of our institution and inform your future roles as a physician? So what unique perspectives will you bring to your medical schools class? That's what this question's getting at. I think a lot of times we immediately think that this might be about our ethnic identity or socioeconomic identity, but that's not necessarily the case. Although if that is something that you want to talk about, it's definitely important to put in here. But you know, they're really looking to see your unique life experiences and what you're bringing to the class. You could talk about your personal identity, your unique work or life experiences, your hobbies, passions, future goals, etc. So this is when I was saying at the beginning that it's important to sit down and brainstorm and reflect on what exactly do you want to show these schools. I know that when I was doing this question, I talked a lot about some of my more unique experiences. I was a non-traditional applicant, so I talked about working as in public education before going into medicine, and just the things that kind of set me apart as an applicant that I wanted schools to see. You could also talk about how these unique attributes are connecting to your goal, your pursuit of medicine. So, you know, you can talk about how this specific experience inspired you to go into medicine, or how it's given you a perspective that might be unique and how you want to bring that to your patients. So again, this is one that I think a lot of times people get focused on speaking just about their ethnic or socioeconomic identity. But I think once you look outside of that and really start looking at all the different things that make you unique and all the different perspectives that you have, then it can be a really fun opportunity to kind of dive a little deeper into that. So then one of the other common questions is the adversity essay. So the example is, please describe to the admissions committee a challenge or a disappointment that you have overcome and what you learned about yourself from that experience. So I think we all know medical school is very difficult, and admissions committees are looking for candidates that have resilience, maturity, and can show the capacity for growth. So you really want to, for this question, you want to reflect on some of the more difficult experiences that you've had, some of the challenges that you've faced. That could be academic challenges, that can be personal setbacks, social disagreements. And I know personally for my essay, I spoke about a disagreement that I had in a social setting. And I think it's important. It can be so easy to think, oh, well, this wasn't really that challenging, or I feel like this wasn't, you know, a big enough issue to talk about, but they just want to see how you've overcome these situations and how you approach them. I saw this on a forum once, the 4 steps for the challenge essay. And the first one is just to identify the challenge in your first paragraph. In your second paragraph, talk about your specific response to it, how you acted. Talk about the result of how you acted, and how that changed, and then talk about the lesson that you learned. So I think in these ones, it's important not to be afraid to be a little vulnerable, maybe to talk about a situation where you weren't super excited with how you reacted. And what they want to see is that personal humility and that willingness to change and willingness to accept, like, maybe this wasn't how I should have acted in that situation. This is what I learned from it, and this is what I'm bringing forward next time that you face a similar challenge. So then our next essay is the leadership essay. And this one, the example here is what characteristics and qualities are necessary for successful leadership? Should all physicians be leaders? And please discuss your reasons. So this is kind of an open-ended prompt. Some of them are more specific, where they'll actually ask you about your specific leadership experiences. And then this one was, there were a few essays that I had where they were just asking more broadly, what does it mean to be a leader? Because physicians are leaders in the healthcare team. So it's important for you to have an understanding of what that means and the type of leader that you want to be. I included this form because I think there's not one simple type of leader. You kind of have to find what works for you. It's all different styles of leadership rather than one specific, this is what you have to do to be a leader. So I think in this experience, or for this question, it's really helpful to use specific examples if you have them. If you've been working in a clinical environment, you can talk about what you've observed physicians doing and how you've observed them working with the healthcare team. So I think having specific examples is really helpful because it shows that you know what you're talking about. It shows that you've seen this and you're recognized. And a lot of times medical schools, they do want to see that you've witnessed and you've observed physicians as leaders. And then also you can connect this to your own experiences in a leadership position. And that doesn't have to be a formal position, such as being like a club president or a tutor. You know, you could talk about more general leadership. So maybe working a group project or just, you know, having younger siblings or being a leader in your family. So I think it's important you can reflect on, if you have actual concrete leadership experiences, you can definitely pull on those, but it's also helpful to think outside of the box with some of these questions and just see how the different styles that you can bring to it. And then the why us essay. This one is very, very common. It's basically just, please explain your interest in blank school of medicine. So most schools are going to have a prompt similar to this. It's a great opportunity to demonstrate your interest in a specific school, but then also to say what you are hoping to bring to the school. So if you've been doing research in a specific area and you see that the school has a lab that's doing that sort of research, you can talk about how you're interested in XYZ lab. Really, they just want to see that you have tangible interest in their school, and they don't want to see kind of generic answers. I think that's something that people kind of fall into, is writing a why us school and then just changing the names around for different schools and different programs to make it all fit. But schools do want to see that you have an actual interest in their curriculum and programs. So one way that you can find out more about that is to read the school's website. Typically, you'll be able to find student groups that the school has, labs that are doing research, different programs that they have. And it's really helpful to tailor it specifically to what some of your past experiences too. Also, I think it's helpful to incorporate the school's mission statement and their program objectives into your answer. So as I was saying before, I had a more service-heavy application. So I made sure to mention that in my why us essays to really find schools that had similar values and missions to mine, just to show that it was a good fit. Whereas for schools that were really heavy on research or, you know, innovation, that was a harder answer for me to answer, just because I didn't really have anything in my application that showed those facets. So again, it's just really important to kind of do some research before you start applying to these schools, just so you know which ones are a good fit and you don't spend $100 on a secondary for a school that really just doesn't fit well with you. So the COVID essay. This one, I'm not sure if it's going to be on this application cycle. I know that almost every school I applied to last year in the 2022-23 application cycle did have a question about COVID. For example, describe how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted your pathway to medical school and include any academic, personal, financial, or professional barriers, as well as other relevant information. I know a lot of students, myself included, did have trouble finding opportunities during COVID, especially when most schools were shut down and it was in-person learning. I personally transferred in the fall of 2019. So COVID hit right after I transferred to UCLA. So all of the labs closed down, all of the in-person opportunities for the most part also closed down. But I think schools do want to see that you are able to find a way to work around that. I personally, even though all of the clinical opportunities, it was hard to find in-person clinical opportunities during that time. I volunteered at a COVID vaccine clinic, and I also did food distribution for a clinic. So things like that. They just want to see your resilience and your creativity and finding opportunities, even when it was a little difficult. But as the world has started opening up again, I'm not sure if they're going to be asking this question, but I do think it's helpful to start planning and maybe have a prompt having a pre-written answer to how COVID-19 impacted you. So you could talk about academic challenges, personal challenges that you faced. And then some schools also had more broad questions where they were asking about the pandemic's effect on healthcare or society in general. So those were difficult questions to answer because those are definitely a little big scope. But I think it's helpful to brainstorm for both, just how COVID affected you personally, and then also how it affected healthcare in general. And that it was also something that came up a lot in interviews. And then finally, we have the upcoming plans essay. This one is really short and sweet, but basically every school asks it. So it's definitely helpful to have this one written and out of the way. So for example, please indicate your plans for the upcoming academic year. If you're in school, list your courses. If you're working, let us know about the nature of your job. For this one, it's very straightforward. You don't have to pull on any stories and do any storytelling for it. You can really just say, this is what I'm doing this year. This is my job. This is the classes I'm taking. If you're doing anything fun, it's really helpful to mention that. A lot of times that'll come up in your interviews. And then, it's typically just 1 to 2 short paragraphs. So don't be afraid to be straightforward with this one. And that's it. It is a pretty short presentation. I mostly went over the prompts. There was one thing I wanted to mention. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but all of these secondaries and coming up with all of these prompts, these are also the questions that you typically see in interviews. So having all of this brainstorming taken care of and all this pre-writing and thinking about the secondaries and thinking about challenges you faced is very helpful, because during your interviews, you'll be asked them again. So it's nice to have already thought about answers to all of these questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to open it up to the Q&A if anyone has any more specific questions. I think one thing that I didn't mention is that secondaries, the timeline for secondaries. So you'll typically start receiving them once your application's been verified in July. And then people are usually responding to them from anywhere from July through August, even up until September. I've heard online people saying that you should try to get all your secondaries in by Labor Day in early September. I don't think that rule's super 100%. I think you can still be submitting your secondary applications throughout September. Another thing that's said commonly online is to try to get your secondaries done within 2 to 3 weeks of receiving them. I can say for sure that I did not do that, and I still got interviews at the schools and got accepted. So I think some of them took me about a month to respond to, and that was fine.
So this is the question I have. How important is it to edit and re-edit your secondaries?
I think it's really helpful. I personally noticed that my secondaries did get stronger the more I edited them. I was able to kind of focus in on what I wanted to say. Especially I was using, for like the diversity essay, I had my pre-written response that I had worked on, but then for every school, I would kind of tweak it a little bit as I was sending it in, and I noticed that it got a lot better. So I think it's something that you want to be looking at. Also having somebody edit your essays for you just to look at them. I know personally for my COVID essay, I was talking a lot about the things I missed out on doing because of COVID and not being able to work in research. So that was my essay, was just talking about the things I didn't do. And then I showed it to my parents and they said, you should talk about all the things that you did do because of COVID, all of the experiences that I was able to see because of it, just to try to have a different perspective. So I think it's important to do both. Did I use any resources to edit my essays beside up here? Yes, I used Grammarly. I sprung the $30 for Grammarly Plus, and it was really helpful. And I do recommend it. I feel like it made my my essays a lot stronger. You can use Grammarly free, and that was what I started off using, but I just decided that I was already spending so much on secondaries that I could do an extra $30 just for 1 month while I was in the middle of submitting them. And it was really helpful.
Yeah, so if you're writing anything for school or anything, gosh, I even use it when I write like emails to people. Grammarly is great. It's I think students could get it at a reduced price, and you could even get it with like a couple of extensions and app downloads and everything else. Yeah, it's a great investment. I use it all the time. I think I've been using it for like the last year that I've used it. They said that I've used it for close to 350,000 words.
Wow.
So it's a great tool. And I sprung up on it, and I got the student discount, but I paid for the whole year. And I got the premium, and
it's really helpful. It tells you if your wording is redundant or if there's, there's something I did all the time. I would leave like a clause hanging. I don't even know what it meant, but it told me how to fix it. So I do recommend it.
Yeah, and then it has this thing also called the essay checker too, which if you're writing any essays, like I wish Grammarly paid me for how much like I've sold.
I know, I was going to say we should be getting a sponsor.
I know, but no.
Okay, so one of the next questions coming in are, what are some ways that we can show school fit in the secondaries? That's a really good one. And that's something that is really important to tie in. So a lot of that is just when you're applying to schools to look into what in your application really fits with the school. So schools are pretty clear on the MSAR. And then also if you come to our events with the deans of admissions, they're pretty specific about what type of students they're looking for. Some schools want students with leadership experience, some want research experience, some want service, being involved in community service. So it's just important. They'll tell you in the mission what they're looking for, and then you can tie in your own experiences in that to connect. So maybe you have a little bit of all three, and that'll be great. You'll be able to, maybe you can write one essay that focuses more on your leadership experiences and tie it into schools that have that in their mission statement. But also the schools will have their objectives. Maybe they want to train the next group of healthcare leaders. So again, it's just tying it into the experiences that you've had. You can even mention their mission statement. Sometimes that helps just to show that you really are familiar with the school. But yeah, definitely if you can tie it back to actual experiences that you've had, they do tend to like that more, just because it demonstrates interest in that, and that you really are specific about it, rather than just saying, oh, I want to do this, or I want to be that kind of doctor, but to actually have something to back it up helps. What did the pre-writing process look like for you? So as I said, I had that month and a half when I had submitted my primary application, and then I was just waiting to be verified. If you submit your application in early June, I've heard that it takes about anywhere from 5 to 6 weeks for your application to be verified through AMCAS. And it's only once it's been verified that schools will start sending you secondary. So you have a little bit of time to work on that. For me, the pre-writing process was I looked up those specific prompts that I brought in earlier, the diversity, challenge, leadership, and just started writing out different experiences that I had that would apply to that one. So for the challenge essay, I sat down and I thought, okay, what are some difficult experiences and difficult situations that I've been in, and how can I talk about that? So I came up with like 4 different scenarios of things that had happened, and then just wrote a little essay about each one of those. And then also I found it really helpful as I got farther along was to write them at different lengths. So I had a really long version of one essay for some of the schools that were asking for 1,500 characters. And then I had a shorter one where if a school was only asking for 200 words, but it would be describing the same situation. And again, Grammarly helped do that too, helped shrink everything down. So I would recommend looking into that. But yeah, it's difficult to get started at the beginning. I'll say it feels overwhelming. I think one of the best things you can do is you can also look online for the schools that you're really interested in, your top programs, and find their secondaries from previous years. And then a lot of times they do reuse that. For the most part, they use the same essays from year to year. Maybe there's a little bit of changes, but you'll be able to find those previous essays and then write responses to those. And that was really helpful. And then also that kind of gets the ball rolling on some of the other, just having those like pre-written prompts. And then, is there anything different you wish you would have done during your secondaries last year? Yeah, I think so. I didn't respond to all of the secondary. As I said earlier, I did about 43 primary applications, and then I only submitted secondaries to about 30 of that. So I did waste a lot of money during the primaries because I was applying to schools that I just wasn't a good mission fit for. And when I was writing the secondaries for them, I was realizing this isn't going to work out. And this is $100. And I was paying for the secondaries out of pocket. And it definitely, it's $100 a pop. So it started to really add up. And for those last 13, I was just so mentally exhausted and then also financially spent that it just wasn't going to work. So I do wish that I had looked a little closer at my school list and really narrowed it down to schools that I actually had more of a mission fit with or that I was interested in going to, rather than just sending out applications to schools because they had a good name. And I thought maybe, I want to send it to the Ivies, but they wanted research. So it wasn't really a good fit. And then we have another question. How long after submitting your secondaries did you receive interview invites for school decisions? Yeah, so it was definitely a long process for me. I think everyone's different with their application season process. So personally, for one school, I had one school that I submitted my secondary to, and I was invited for an interview 2 weeks later. So I submitted my secondary in mid-September, was interviewed very early October, and then I was accepted in early October. But then other schools, I didn't hear anything for a while. So I ended up having 5 interview invites. Out of those, one of them was in November, I believe. In October. So I had one interview invite in September, one in October, and then nothing. It was just silence after those ones up until the new year. So then I had one at the beginning of January, and then 2 more in January and February. So it was a spread out cycle. I've seen online people say that if you don't have an interview invite by Thanksgiving, that you're probably going to have to reapply, but I didn't think that was true. I mean, I had 3 interview invites after the Christmas, and it was completely fine. So I wouldn't worry too much about what you see online. Again, as I was saying, they say that you should try to get your secondaries in by Labor Day or after 3 weeks, or there's all these different myths out there. And although it is helpful to apply early, I don't think it's the end all be all. That I've seen people that have submitted their secondaries in October get interviews. So I don't know, the application cycle is a long process, and school decisions, I didn't get it, it took me until May to hear back from a good amount of schools. And there's some that I still haven't heard back from. I'm on the wait list for. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's hard. You don't want to compare yourself to other people too much, just because everybody's cycle is different and everyone's bringing in different strengths, and schools are on their own timelines as well. So yeah, that is all the questions that we had in the Q&A. If anyone has any other ones that they want to throw in there, I'd be more than happy to talk about it. I know that this the application cycle is a bit confusing. I don't know, are any of you applying this cycle and getting ready to start pre-writing? We have, yeah, good amount of people coming in saying that they're applying the cycle. It's stressful. Kudos to you guys. Like, it's a fun one, you know, it's a whole cycle. And I think that's something you have to remember, to be kind to yourself and be patient with yourself, because it's tough and it's really easy to find a lot of information online to, you know, and to compare yourself and look at other people. I know I personally was working with a group of people and we were all applying at the same time, and just, it's hard not to feel bad when somebody says, oh, I already have 3 interview invites, and it's like, oh, I haven't had any yet. So good luck to you guys. I think you're going to do great, and just be patient with yourself and be kind to yourself.
I also just put a link that has a library of pretty much, and it's updated pretty regularly. So you could like literally go look and say, okay, I'm applying to these schools and these are the essays, and you can start pre-writing them. So you don't have to wait. And that library, they keep a pretty good pretty good update.
Yeah, I used that that website a lot myself. It was really helpful. And that was actually for me. It's inside the chat right now. Here, I'll send it to, we had a question. Somebody was asking which website. But yeah, for me, the very first part of pre-writing for the secondaries was finding the essays specific to my top pick schools, and then just starting to work on those ones. And that, honestly, that starts to cover a lot, because most of the schools are going to ask you about a challenge or a diversity or gap year or COVID. So once you start doing a few secondaries, you really start building almost like a bank of answers and responses that you can use and modify for other ones. The only one that you really don't want to do that for is the Why Us essay, because I think schools can tell when it's just general. They do want to see more of a commitment to their specific programs. And then we have one question. Do you happen to know if we were to redo the MCAT after receiving a score in June and weren't happy with it, can we submit it later, even after submitting the primary applications and secondaries? That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I think this would be a good one for the admissions people. From my understanding of it, is once your application is verified, that information is sent over to the schools. Although I think it might be that once your secondary is complete, that's when they send over the information. So maybe if you might have a little bit of a break. I will say something that I saw many of my coworkers doing that were taking the MCAT in the summer was they submitted their primary application for just one school. So I had a coworker who took the MCAT in June and wasn't going to get a score back until July. So at the very beginning of June, he sent in his primary application to one school, just one. And that had all of that gave him a chance to upload his personal statement, his experiences, and all of that. And then once he got his MCAT score back, he applied to more schools. So you can basically, by doing that, by submitting to just the one school, that allowed his application to get verified and go through that verification queue, because they have to look at your grades and make sure everything matches with your transcripts. So once it got sent through that cycle, he was able to add on more schools, and then he didn't have to wait the 6 weeks for verification. It went through immediately. So that might be something to look into if you weren't happy with your scores, to apply to the one and then apply to more. I don't know, Jubin, do you have anything to add to that one?
I think the issue is that you have to understand that even though it's an automatic system, there's people on the other end of it. So if you are gonna submit your application and then you have an updated MCAT, you may update it, but they may not see it on the other end. And so it's kind of like a one-shot deal. Like, you're spending a considerable amount of money to do this. So make sure you're happy with your MCAT before you apply, than to, say like, I'm going to apply, then I'm going to take the MCAT again. Because some schools even tell you, like, don't send us any updates, and people send them updates all the time and it doesn't end up anywhere. So, it's a long process, and make sure you're ready to do it rather than just doing it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think it might be it might be, best if you're receiving your score in June, you still have enough time. Applying in June is still pretty early. So I think you would probably be fine just waiting to get your score back and making sure that you wanted to apply then, or if you wanted to reapply at a different point, or, redo the MCAT. We had one question around how much did you spend for the whole application process, including primaries, secondaries, and interviews? It's expensive. It really was. It ended up being a lot more than I thought it was going to be. So the primary application itself, I think I paid probably about, I think it was about $2,000 just to submit to, because I applied to so many different schools. So that was on my fault. I should not have applied to that many schools on my primary application. I believe you're at a fixed price for the first 5 schools that you apply to, and then after that, for every additional school, there's an additional cost. So something to look into. And then secondaries, again, they really did range. Some schools, I know the Kaiser Permanente school was only $30 to apply to them versus some of the schools back east were $150. So each one is different. It's important to apply to the ones that you're actually interested in, want to complete the secondary for, and really do want to keep moving forward. I think there's this push to apply to as many schools as possible. And if you do have the financial means to do that, that might be something to look into. But personally, for me, once I started doing the secondaries, it added up quickly. It was, on average about $100 each. And then luckily for me, my interview cycle was virtual, so I did not have to pay to attend any interviews. So that was the one nice thing, is I didn't have to pay for a flight and a hotel room.
The other thing is make sure you apply to the fee assistance program, because they'll pay for your MCAT registration, a reduced cost, I think. Sorry, some prep material, but then also will cover a certain number of your primary and secondary fees. It comes up to like $4,000. So, but you have to follow the rules that are posted on there, and there's like specific guidelines for it.
Yeah, definitely. I really recommend looking into the fee waiver and making, if you qualify, to apply for that. I will say too that some of the secondaries, the schools, they actually would send out an email saying if you're having trouble paying for the secondary, to contact their office directly, especially if you, I was talking about being a non-traditional student and attending community college, came up in my essay a lot. So, or my essays a lot. So I think, even though I didn't qualify for the fee assistance waiver, there were some schools that reached out and said, you can please let us know if you're having any difficulties. And sometimes that's all it takes, is just emailing them and saying, I'm really interested in your program. Is there any way I can have the secondary fee waived? And it does work out for people sometimes. So it's worth a shot if you aren't afraid to send out that email. I think another thing for right now, it's a lot. It feels a bit overwhelming. I think I know personally, I had all of the secondaries arrived within 3 days of each other, and that was 40 secondaries all at once. And trying to tackle that was really stressful and a little bit nerve-wracking, especially when you see online people saying that it has to be done in a certain amount of time. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think at this point in time, it's really good for you just to start brainstorming. And like I was saying, look at those common prompts and just start coming up with some scenarios and just write it down. That was what I would do, is I would just write without thinking, without wanting it to be perfect or worrying about grammar or anything, but just to get my thoughts onto the page. And then after, take a break and come back and look at it the next day. And then, maybe try to start organizing things a little bit more. But I think just getting started can be a really hard part, but you're at a good time to start planning on these. And then also one other thing I did not mention was look over your essays that you had. So a lot of times, in your experience essays, you'll be talking about these specific things that you did, but you might not have had an opportunity to talk about that exact situation. So, it's one thing to describe your role as a tutor, and then another thing to be able to talk about like specific interactions that you had that made an impact on you. And that's what the secondaries are really good for, is to actually show these situations and so show these different scenarios and how you responded and how you would respond in similar situations. So a lot of times they like to see, they want you to talk about stories or like scenarios rather than just describe something that you're interested in, because that shows, it shows that your lived experiences. And that's what they're really looking for with this, is taking your primary application, which is all just, you know, this is what it was called, this is what I did, and actually making it a little bit more of, well, here are their day-to-day things, and this is how I worked with other people in this role. I know this was a lot of information. We still don't have any in the Q&A, but I think you guys you're off to a good start. If you're coming to something at the beginning of June to talk about secondaries, and it shows that you guys are already thinking about it, you're preparing for it. And I think you're in a good situation. There's a lot of good resources online too. You can find examples of other people's secondaries and just like what they're supposed to look like. I would recommend looking at things, you know, to use those resources. It's nice to have them free and available. And then looking at the previous secondaries is also going to be really helpful. Oh, we had one question, how to stand out. Yeah, that's always the pre-med question. How do you stand out in these essays? I think what they really want to see is just authenticity. I think that's really, we've had a lot of, you know, deans of admissions coming, and they say that they want to see a story. They want to see something that connects your experiences with who you are and why you're applying to that school. So if you're able to find common themes in your application, I know for me, I did really talk a lot about being from a community college and then working with PreMedCC and that journey, and working with, you know, being able to help and give back to a community that I was a part of. So if you can find common themes, or maybe just ways to connect to your story that make it almost into like a linear, ways to connect your journey into like a linear story, which is easier said than done. I know that's a lot of writing and it's hard to look at that, but I think it's important to sit back and reflect on your application, on what you're bringing to the table and what you want them to see in you. And that's, if you're not applying the cycle, that's something you could do, is maybe look for experiences that would tie into what you're doing and kind of tie everything together. So then we have another question is, what is best for non-traditional students? Again, that's a really, you know, being a non-traditional student is really strong for certain programs. They're really looking for people that have different experiences, different life perspectives. So definitely talk about your non-traditional journey and be honest about, that's what I did. And I think schools like that, it definitely came up a lot in secondaries, but then in the interviews, it was an opportunity for me to talk about being non-traditional and not really having the most typical path to medicine. Not that there is a typical path to medicine. I think if anything, schools are really looking for people that maybe do things a little differently. So yeah, just look at your story, look at the different things that you've done and how it ties together, and just be proud of it and own it. I think schools are really looking for that. We had another one. What if somebody has 10 gap years? And then how do you stay motivated during that? Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, I had a long journey to medicine. I was an undergrad for a long time because I was an education major before becoming pre-med. So I had to start over with all the prerequisite classes. So I think look at your story, look at, you know, that'll really give you a kind of, I'm sure there's a really strong why medicine answer in there, something that's pushing you forward. There's a reason that after 10 gap years, you still want to become a doctor and you're working towards that goal. So I think really paying attention to that reason and that fire and passion that's driving you forward is important to identify that, and then make sure that that's coming across in your application and that they're able to see that that passion. So it's hard. I know that it's a long journey. I did 2 gap years after a long time in undergrad and then 2 gap years on top of that. And I think with the pre-med going into medicine, you just kind of have to expect that it is going to be a longer ride. It's going to take a while. Even once you get to medical school, you still have 4 more years and then residency. So just enjoy the ride and enjoy the journey. And that's how medicine goes. That's what a lot of the deans that we have will mention, is just that there's not really ever a goal. There's always something more that you're working towards, and to learn to appreciate the present as you're working towards your goal that's the best way to stay motivated. And then another question was, how do you expand more on your experiences without sounding repetitive from what's on your primary application? Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that ties back to giving specific stories and scenarios of things that are on your primary application. So if you're talking about, you worked as a patient care technician at a hospital, that'll be on your primary application. It'll say that you did that job and that's where you worked. But during the secondaries, you're able to really build on that a little bit more. So you can talk about specific interactions that you had with patients in that setting, or maybe, having attending get mad at you and yell at you in front of everyone, or something like that. The little stories and anecdotes of those experiences that are on your primary application, the secondaries will give you a chance to really flesh out the realities of those jobs and what you actually learned, instead of just saying, this is what I did. I was there for this many hours. This was my responsibility. Now you have an opportunity to say, this is what it looked like, and this is how I communicated with my team members, and this is how I responded when things weren't working out for me. And that's it just gives you a little bit more of a human element to your application, rather than just activities and XY hours and grades and all the numbers that are on the primary application. Now you get to really show your personality. And then again, secondaries are probably not going to be coming out until, I think most schools don't even start sending out applications until late in June. So that would be for the earliest verified students. Maybe very late June, they might start sending out secondaries, but for the most part, you're not going to be getting them until July. And then July and August is going to be secondary season, and they'll just be all coming in at the same time. So you still have a lot of time to start working on brainstorming and maybe coming up with some rough drafts. And then somebody asked, did you continue adding schools while waiting to get verified? I personally did not. Just because I did I sent in my application to so many schools. I had already taken my MCAT the summer before, so I knew my score there. And then I had one gap year under my belt when I was sending in my application. So I had spent a while, I wasn't taking any more classes, and it just seemed like I was ready to submit to everything. I did submit my primary application to 43 schools, and then I ended up only submitting secondaries to 30 of those. So that was 13 schools that I was probably paying about, I can't remember the specific number. I think it's $75 per school. So it was just, I should not have done that. I think adding schools while waiting to get verified, I knew some people that had done that, and it didn't seem like it was a problem at any point. Once you get verified through AMCAS, they'll send over your application right away to all the schools that you've applied to. So if you were adding on additional schools while you're waiting for verification, that would be fine. And then even if you are verified and add on additional schools, it'll go automatically through to them. So I think that's a valid way to do it if you don't want to, if you're still waiting to get a grade back or waiting for your MCAT score. And I knew a couple of people that did it, and it was okay. And yeah, I answered how many schools did I apply to? That was the 43, but then I really only actually applied to 30 of those. And then when making your school list, is there anything you would do different now? And then how did I make my list? Yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of things I would do differently now. So as I said before, I really did not have any biomedical research going into the application process. And that was something that was going to be a problem for certain schools. You really have to look into what schools are looking for. I know Stanford's a big one that I sent in my primary to, but I never actually sent in my secondary to, because we hosted one of the deans of admissions for Stanford, and she was really saying how important research is at their institution. And coming in with no research hours, even if I had a lot of other things that I was proud of on my application, it just wasn't a good fit for that specific school. So I think I would have looked a little more closely at the MSAR. If you have the fee assistance waiver, you'll also get the MSAR in it, which is the medical school admissions requirement tool. And that'll allow you to look and see what the school is looking for, their mission statement, what students, like the percentage of students that were involved in clinical experiences or leadership or research, just so you can kind of see roughly what they're looking for in students. And then also for how did you make your list? I knew that there were schools. I knew that I had a very service heavy application just because I did a lot of community service, and then also worked in a nonprofit clinic and worked with PreMedCC. So I knew that that was something that was one of the strengths of my application and something that I wanted to bring up and talk about. And I wanted a school where I would have an opportunity to be involved in community service and like service oriented work. So I just Googled that, medical schools that look for, service minded medical schools. And then I found some lists, and I would go through the schools on the list and look at their websites and be like, oh yeah, it looks like that's a good fit, or, oh, they only accept in-state students and I don't live in that state, so that's not a good fit. And then, yeah, I just went from there to kind of narrow down my school list and find schools that I thought would be a good mission fit. And then also, I was really interested in medical humanities. So then I would look up schools or medical schools with medical humanities focus. And then again, just kind of go from there to see, okay, well, this is somewhere where they're going to look at my application and it might, they might be happy with some of the work that I've done. So I think it's really just important to kind of identify the strengths in your application and what type of applicant you are. I know one of the deans we've had says that there's like leadership oriented ones, there's research oriented students, there's community service. And it's really important just to kind of look and see what you're bringing to the table. And then also if you're a non-traditional student and you've had a really unique path to medicine or a diverse life experiences, there's schools where that's what they're really looking for. So I think it's just important to kind of go through. Could I repeat those types of students? I will, yes. I'm gonna actually put the link in because it was the dean of UCLA, and I feel like she'll probably be a little bit more eloquent about what they're looking for in the different types of students than I would be. So I'm just gonna pull that up really quickly. And I'll put it in the chat for everyone. But yeah, it's I think the most important thing is just to kind of look at the journey that you've had and what, maybe you worked in a clinic for a long time. Maybe you've, did some volunteer work at a community center, and just when you're doing the AMCAS application, you'll have your most meaningful experiences section. And a lot of times that's where you're going to find the type of student you are, if you're more of a research, or if you're a leadership, or if you're a service student. Okay, I found it. So this is the presentation from Dr. Lucero, who is one of the deans of admissions at UCLA. And she goes into it a little bit more. Jubin, I'm going to send it to you. So I'm not able to send it to everyone in the chat.
Yeah, you can. I mean, I could repost it, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, and I think another important thing is when you're making your school list, I mentioned earlier that some schools do have they have minimum GPAs or minimum MCATs that they require. And then a lot of schools also have really strong preference for in-state versus out-of-state students. So that's something to look at too when you're starting making your list. If you're, applying to a school that's 96% in-state students and you don't live there or have any strong ties to that state, it might not be worth it to apply. I know personally, for me, University of Washington was a school I was really interested in, and even though I have family up there, I still didn't. I didn't even get a secondary from them just because they only send secondaries to students that are in-state or that are affiliated at the WWAMI region. So just looking through things like that to make sure that you meet the minimum GPA and MCAT that they're looking for. And that's not all schools. That's only a handful of schools that do have those hard screens for stats. So if it doesn't say anything on MSAR, I think it is worth it to apply if you're really interested in that program. But if they do have something listed and you're not at that cutoff, then it's probably in your best interest to not send an application to that school, just because they're, they just send it through like a computer and you probably won't get a secondary from them. But look into it and make sure that they have that information online. And if they don't, then I think it's still worth a shot. Also, one thing that I didn't do that much during my application cycle that I kind of wished I had was to email schools and ask questions and be a little bit more, a lot of schools, they have admissions officers whose job it is to respond to emails. If you have any sort of question about if a school screens or not, or if a school, what type of students they're looking for, or if, anything like that, then I say to feel free to reach out. You can also send schools update letters. So there were a few schools where, as Jubin said before, some schools don't accept update letters, but a lot of them do. So if you have any important updates, to feel free to send that to a school, especially if you're still waiting to hear back about an interview from them, just to be a little bit more involved in the process.
I would just add one caveat to that. Look at their website first before reaching out to them, because some of them will get really annoyed if you're asking a question they've already posted. I know that they spend hours and hours and hours updating their websites and mission statements, and they look through it and edit it. And if you don't read that and you just email them, like, a lot of that information they put out there, they want it to be put out there for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're recruiting you, but second, answering emails is like the least efficient way of outreach. And so just make sure you look at their websites. Like, you should know at least have an idea of a mission statement of a school, and that's on their website, and it's also in the MSAR as well. But if you don't want to shell out the money for the MSAR, if you're not applying this year or whatever, just make sure you look at their websites, because their websites has a lot of information. So, so that's the only thing is I would just add to that is it's yes, if you have a specific question, reach out to them. But if it's posted on their website, then probably don't email them asking what's the requirements for your school. Or don't email them and say what's your GPA, because that information's all out there and they post it. And if you're going and it's a public medical school, they have to publish all that data, so it's not a secret. So yeah, just don't email them with those things. But if you have specific questions saying first of all, what a good one is during COVID, my school went. This happened to a lot of people. My school went to fully online and went also to fully pass and fail with my courses. That's a good question to email them and ask them. And most schools understand that part of what happened during COVID, but
Yeah, definitely. And, it just shows if you're really, really interested in a school, if it's, especially if it's one of your top pick schools that you're really connected to and really want to go to, then you do want to be very familiar with their website, because that's where you're going to find information on the specific programs that they have, their curriculum model. Being able to mention curriculum models in your essay is really, really important, or in your secondaries is also really shows that you're interested in it. For example, if a school has this innovative curriculum that ties in medical humanities and, just to be able to have mentioned that program by name or that model by name and say that you're really interested in and how it connects to your application. Things like that, those are really going to set you apart in the Why Us essay, and they're going to show that you really do care about the school and that you're really looking deeply at their website and who they are and what the school is offering.
Yeah, and I think we've had almost 30 deans of admission for medical school. Like if you're look at through our YouTube page or our page and see, if they literally spend an hour and a half to 2 hours talking about their schools and what they're looking for. And like they don't know us any money to show up. Like, you know, they show up because they want to recruit you and they have a lot of information. So you could go back on YouTube or you could show up to them. We'll have some of the same speakers in the future and ask him any questions you want. And you get to ask him anonymously, then they don't even know who you are. So,
and I will say, speaking from personal experience, particularly during my interviews, if I was interviewing at a school that we had hosted at PreMedCC, I absolutely went back and I watched very closely. I took notes on their presentations, and because they say at the beginning exactly what type of students they're looking for, what attributes they want to see. So, when a school would say that they're really looking for resilience and they're looking for, people that think outside the box, I went through and I thought, okay, I need to come up with some answers to short questions about how I thought outside the box so that I can show them that without saying it, because that's what they're coming here for, is to really show what type of students they're looking for. And to be able to demonstrate that back during an interview in particular it's really helpful. So.
Yeah, I have two stories. We had one person that I knew that came to one of the meetings and found out from the dean about scholarships and stuff, and basically learned about all of this stuff. And then when she was offered admission, she brought all that stuff up and said, "Hey, I'm looking for XYZ scholarship that you guys have," and she ended up getting it. And I know another person who came to one of our sessions, and the person that interviewed her on Zoom, and this was one of the schools that they don't announce who's going to interview you, but she actually watched her entire video. So she knew a lot about the interviewer when she was being interviewed, and that really helped her connect with that interviewer as well. So
that happened during some of my interviews, just having that connection and seeing them and knowing about the people that you might be talking to is really helpful. And we have all of our videos on YouTube. So if you missed a session and you want to go back and, maybe you're really interested in UCLA, you can go back and watch that video and you might end up seeing those people in your interview if you are to interview there. When somebody says, when you mention that you're interested in a specific program, do you do it during secondary essays or interviews or both? Both. Yeah. So this is really your chance to say that you're specifically interested in this school for these programs and these reasons. The secondary is a great way to show that. But then I would say that a lot of times the interviews are blind. So I would just bring up the same stories that I said in my secondaries and in my primary application. I'd mentioned them in my interviews because I knew that it was blind interviewing. So they hadn't seen my file, or maybe they had just seen my primary. And then I would talk about some of the stories or the programs or reasons that I was interested in the school during my interview because it was protected. So that's one thing. I feel like with the interview, you don't have to worry as much about being redundant versus when you're submitting your secondary interviews, you don't want to copy and paste from your personal statement. You want that information to be different, the primary versus the secondary. But going into the interview, you can feel free to bring up things that are already in your essay without worrying about saying, repeating yourself.
Yeah, and I think one of the best things you should remember is that the primary application goes to every school. Every school will see that. Your secondary will only go to that school. So probably in your primary, you should not say that I want to go to XYZ medical school because of this program. But in your secondary, you should definitely say that you want to go to this. Some of them even ask you this question, why do you want to come here? And that's where you say because of XYZ, because you have this program or this focus or these things. And then your interview.
Or this area, this location, you want to live in.
This area, this location, these hospitals. And then the other one is the interview. You just kind of solidify that in person. So it's much easier to type stuff, but it's much harder to do it on the spot when you're face to face with someone or Zoom to Zoom in front of someone. I know like one person in their interview said like, oh, I'm really interested because I was born in this hospital, that the school has was like safety net for my entire family, and guess what? That person got into that school. So they made it very personal in their interview as well.
That kind of ties into one of the other questions we have, which was how personal would you advise us to get in primaries and secondaries? This one's it's a little tricky. We've had deans of admissions and they've said that they want to see a level of vulnerability that you're willing to talk about. I had to talk about some failures and overcoming challenges. And there's a level where you are going to be getting personal with those sorts of stories. If you're not getting personal, then you're not really getting to the root of the question. But then as for the level that you're comfortable sharing, I think that really does depend on you. I think it depends on the school. It's a little bit tricky because I know mental health struggles is one that comes up pretty often when we have deans, and people do ask a lot, should I disclose if I struggled with mental health or anxiety, depression, anything? Should you disclose that? And every school is a little bit different. So I don't know if there's really a hard and fast answer to that. Yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't. I think it really does depend on the school and also on the level that you're comfortable sharing about those, struggling with something. So it's difficult because schools are looking for resilience. So if you're able to demonstrate personal growth, that's something that you should do. I know that when I was doing my secondaries, I did talk about imposter syndrome and overcoming self-doubt. And that I felt like was a safe topic to talk about, but that did also show personal growth. But it's really up to you, the level that you're comfortable disclosing, because unfortunately there is, it's medical school isn't perfect when it comes to dealing with mental health struggles. So that would be just one thing to really, to think about the level that you're comfortable with. And then also maybe if you can talk about different, things that you've gone through or talk about specific examples might be helpful. It's tough because you do have to be vulnerable and they do want to see who you are as a person and what you've overcome. But yeah, it's just, it kind of depends on the situation. But if you feel like there is something in your application or something that you've gone through that's really important for you to talk about, that really does reflect your journey to medicine, then I think it might be, I think you should show that. And we've had deans say the exact same thing where they want to see why you want to be a doctor. And if it comes back to, maybe a family member being sick and, maybe learning to work with that and to take care of somebody, they'll want to see that stuff, and that it might be a little uncomfortable or a little close to you. So yeah, it really does depend on the situation. I think that's something that only you can really answer. And that's another one to ask, to come to one of the a school that you're interested in, to come and ask the dean themselves what they would think of it, because they definitely, that's a lot of what our sessions do, is allow people to ask those specific questions in a safe, anonymous space, and it's really helpful. Another thing, I know this is mostly about secondaries, but just because we have mentioned interviews a little bit, I do want to give people some information that for interview questions, I know on Student Doctor Network, which they have a forum, which I don't know if I really recommend the forum because it can get a little, especially when you're in the application season, it can get a little neurotic, but they do have lists of common interview questions from schools. So I think that was really helpful for me when I was preparing for interviews, was to look and see specifically what those schools would ask, and just to start preparing questions or answers to those questions. So it's the same thing as the secondaries, where you're able to find lists of secondary prompts online. You can more often than not find lists of the interview questions as well. Now, there are some schools that have you sign an NDA at the beginning, so you're not allowed to discuss any of the interview process. So for those ones, you're not going to be able to find anything. But for a lot of schools, they do have everything posted, and you can kind of look through that and start preparing that way. So the Q&A is currently empty. I don't know if anyone has any other questions that they want to ask.
Going once, going twice.
And I'll put my email, my PreMedCC email in the chat. If there's anything, if you guys want, somebody to look over your secondary or your primary before you submit, feel free to reach out.
Alrighty, so no more questions. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Madeleine, for joining us. And I know that today was your last day of work, so before you move, so thank you for making time and go celebrate being unemployed.
Unemployed for a month and a half.
All right, talk to you later.
Good luck, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.